Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Men for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, G-R-A-N, group at edinarealty.com or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners. On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 2 3/4 game series against the Detroit Tigers. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Men for the Win. My name is David Kufis. With me, as always, is Dan Thompson. The Twins take 2 out of 2 3/4. I don't know how this works, Dan. It's been so long since we've had a game. They say, you know what? Let's just call it.
I had to look up rules about whether Jose Miranda's 5th hit counted and all these different things. It does, by the way. So after winning that game, getting it in before the rain, it seemed like a pretty good choice to bump it up by an hour, I think.
I don't know that they would have been able to do what they did if they didn't bump it up. And I was out weeding this morning in the rain, but it was like sprinkling. And I was like, I wouldn't want to play baseball in this. And then as I'm watching the game, the weather just continually gets worse. And I'm like, okay, moving it up, yes, very good choice.
Well, I think the umpires were conspiring there. They had no reason to keep playing after, the 5th or the 6th inning in that game. And Ryan Jeffers nearly paid the price with a ball to his head. But luckily, they do finally call it. The Tigers can go back. I guess they're going to Cincinnati to play the Reds, and the Twins are getting ready now to host 3 against the Astros.
Yes, so and it is, it's the season, Dan, where you always seem to be recording in a new place. Your background is never the same. It's not the school. It's not your house. It's just a different room each time.
I know. I'm in Iowa now. I'm in Okoboji, where the water is almost up to everybody's chin in the lake, but no, everybody's doing okay. Yes, I'm here now. I will be in Minnesota, though, for this Houston series. Excited to watch that with you. And then who knows where I'll be next Wednesday. I'll be somewhere else, though. I will not be in Iowa or in your house, for that matter. Maybe. Who knows?
Who knows? You never know. And it should be noted, Dan, I'm not sure if you're getting extra sleep in the summer now that you're no longer waking up for classes. But the long question that we've had is whether or not Bailey Ober gets to sleep in, knowing that he has 4 children. And in the latest episode of The Diamond, the truth has come out. Ober gets to sleep in on game days and when he's on the road, but never outside of those days, Dan.
That's hilarious and very fair, right? You have to be able to take your share of the games. But that brings, I wonder on those road trips, is he just sleeping starfish style just to kind of enjoy the extra space?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question in my mind that he's a big human. He probably gets a room that he has a king and then he asks for a room that has a queen that he can smush into it just to make sure he's got ample space to spread out. So speaking of these trips, Dan, on road trips for Ober, you're actually going to take a bus from Iowa to Minnesota because nobody would go down and pick you up. How did you go about that? Do you have to get on dial-up to buy a bus ticket, or how does that work, Dan?
No, my family's going to drop me off on the side of the road on Interstate 35, and then I'm just going to flag down the bus as it goes by. No, it's actually I'm picking it up kind of halfway between Des Moines and the Twin Cities. So I'm going to enjoy that quiet 2.5 hours I'm going to have on the bus to read a book, use Wi-Fi. I hear bus travel is very good right these days, and so it's made some jumps since I was doing a lot of bus travel in the Twin Cities about 12 or 13 years ago.
So, and think, you'll never have to turn around once and say, I will turn this bus around.
No. And after a long drive to Iowa, I am looking forward to not having to say that to anybody. Oh, if I do, I think it would be very weird. Maybe there'd be a rowdy teenager behind me. I might have to tell them, hey, quiet down.
Yes. Okay, well, with that here, lots to talk about in this series. Maybe less baseball stuff and more like off-field stuff that's happened along the way. But let's go ahead and jump into the series recap.
Series recap.
Twins come away with this one 5-3, Dan. SWR on the mound. He goes 5 2/3, 4 hits, 3 earned runs, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts, but 2 home runs, Dan. And here's the thing about SWR. We sort of criticized Rocco for not letting him get to the 3rd time through the order. There are times, Dan, when we must admit that Rocco Baldelli, he's got the mind, he's got the right decisions, and we should just let him manage his team. Because clearly he had the better outlook when it comes to SWR.
I can't compete with you physically, and you're no match for my brains.
He is pulling the right strings with these starting pitchers right now. Because, yes, a series where he really made a lot of good decisions. We're going to kind of talk through that quite a bit here. We'll start with the top of the first, where Buxton makes a diving grab to rob a hit from Riley Green, and just another sign that Buxton looks really good. Bottom of third, the Twins are able to get on the board. Farmer singles, Margot singles, Correa strikes out after an 11-pitch at-bat, and then Royce Lewis hits a 2-run double, and we're all feeling really good until he comes out of the game a little bit later with a groin injury. We will talk more about that going forward. But yeah, the Twins are early off to a 2-0 lead.
Yeah, so then in the top of the fifth, the Tigers strike back here with Justin Henry Malo. He solo homers, and then Baddoo, who is a very well-known name to the Twins, who was a former Twins prospect who the Tigers picked up. He absolutely mashed against the Twins the first season after the Twins lost him, but he's since come back to earth. He hits a single, but then he advances to third on an error by SWR. He just throws the ball absolutely nowhere near Carlos Santana. And then Ryan Creedler with a 2-run homer, and then the Tigers take the lead 3-2.
Why is Akil Baddoo still in the majors? He's batting 132 with a 582 OPS. It's just, I mean, that's kind of where the Tigers are at right now.
Well, Dan, I think we should be real careful. What's the old saying about glass houses and all that? There's some guys on our roster, Dan, who I'm sure a lot of people around the league could say the same thing.
Yeah, but not as many as the Tigers. Anyway, of all people in the bottom of the fifth, it's Manny Margot tying the game up with a solo home run, which really gets SWR off the hook in terms of a decision. And then in the bottom of the seventh, the Twins are able to take a lead. We're going to talk a lot more about this, but they do take a lead on a Buxton run to go to head 4-3. Bottom of the eighth, Correa hits a solo home run as insurance, so the Twins don't get to win a one-run game here, and that streak of one-run losses continues. Clean innings by Alcala, Jackson, Duran there at the end, and then... And then you have a note about Detroit reliever Vest getting the loss, which you thought was pretty apt.
'Cause my chest is cold and my arms aren't.
We just love vests in Minnesota, Dan. It's our thing as a team.
Oh.
See my vest, see my vest, see my vest.
We have two vest sounders now to unveil. We'll see which one sticks, I suppose.
On to game two here, Dan. Twins lose this one in just great fashion. I mean, if you're going to lose a game, right? Lose it boldly. Yeah. So they lose this one 9-2.
Yes, we will talk more about the holistic take on them losing this game a little bit later. But yes, David Festa struggles. Again, he goes 5 innings. He gives up 7 earned runs, though, this time. 9 hits, no walks. He does strike out 6, but I think that's because he's facing the Tigers. There are some good things. Josh Staumont and Caleb Thielbar each pitch a clean inning, so that's good. We'll talk about them a little bit later. We also saw the debut of Brooks Lee, who was called up to replace Royce Lewis on the roster. He had a couple hits, both singles to center, including his first RBI, but otherwise, not a great game for the Twins.
No, they didn't look great offensively. Defensively, they didn't actually look terrible, and I have to give some props to Christian Vasquez, who had a good day at the plate, and then also behind the plate. He had a couple of good plays, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in Beast versus Bench, but the way that he tried to manage David Festa deserves a lot of credit.
You know, if only that management was worth the roster spot that he's taking up right now. They still lost 9-2. I mean, you're claiming that
yes.
He managed David Festa well while he gave up 7 earned runs?
No, I'll talk more about it. Yes,
right.
I understand David Festa did not pitch well. That's not what I'm saying by any stretch of the imagination.
All right. Well, anyway, the Tigers able to score in the top of the third here with a single, out, but then single, Carson Kelly grand slam on a high fastball out of the zone. I wanted to point out the location of that pitch. And then that is followed by Wenzel Perez with a solo home run. So it's 5-0 Tigers before you can blink. And the Twins are able to answer in the bottom of the third with a Christian Vasquez home run, his third of the year. I'm eager to see if you put him as your beast. But then bottom of the fourth, Brooks Lee gets his first hit, a single to center. He gets a big ovation. Any early thoughts on Brooks Lee here?
I'll just say Andrew Hoganson texted us, and I think we all sort of had a similar thought. I think that this guy could be great for the team. However, when you think about batting stances, Dan, you think about like Jeter, and you think about Ken Griffey, and you think about Ichiro, and you think about even Mike Trout to some extent in the more modern era. Brooks Lee's approach, Dan, sort of looks like he's having some, intestine drama, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's a very weird angle, I think, to be putting your posterior region.
It's not exactly like Giancarlo Stanton's intimidating stance, or yes. Aaron Judge. Like, Brooks Lee is not going to intimidate anybody into submission here, but the guy can hit.
He can. He got his first hit, and then later in the game, he gets his first RBI, which is great. I mean, to get those things out of the way in the first game, a little bit of a bummer, obviously, that this happens in a game that he'll remember for the rest of his life, but he'll remember a loss 9-2.
Yeah, the Tigers get their other runs on a Riley Green 2-run home run, and then a Matt Vierling 2-run home run off of Funderburk. So 9-2, not a game the Twins were really in at any point.
No, well, let's go on to game 3, which was called in the bottom 7th, but really they probably could have called it after the 5th, I'd say, when the Twins win this one 12-3.
Yes, and they fall behind 3-0 early. The Tigers actually score when Colt Keith homers on an 0-2 count slider. It was something like, I think it was the 9th 0-2 home run the Twins have given up. I'm pretty sure that was the stat on the TV cast. So yes, another disappointing pitch location there from the Twins in this one, from Bailey Ober.
It's weird, Dan. Why would you even mention the fact
I'm
that the
mentioning
count
it
was
because
0-2?
I knew that you were going to mention it. So I was trying to get ahead of things so that I could say it and you didn't have to say it so snarkily, and then you still came in and said it snarkily.
Well, I just don't understand, because your approach to this is, it was just a mistake.
Yeah, it was.
No big deal.
Okay, it wasn't even that bad of a pitch. It wasn't middle. It was a slider. It looked middle coming in, right? And then it kind of veered off towards the side of the plate.
No, it veered off towards the batter's bat, Dan, is where that veered. Again, to reiterate my point for the 1,000th time on this podcast, when you're throwing 0-2, you can make a mistake, but it shouldn't be a mistake that can hurt you in the way that Twins pitchers love throwing.
All right. Well, I think sometimes batters just make good plays. They make good contact. That's okay.
No, and I will fully admit that. Like, Urshela had a hit in this series where it was a scorcher to left field that was basically in the dirt. There's not much you can do about that, but you can do a lot to not throw a pitch middle on 0-2, Dan.
Well, anyway, the Twins' problems are worse in the top of the second because Ryan Jeffers fails to catch a strike 3, which allows Zach McKinstry to go to first, and then the Tigers actually get 2 runs out of that. So it's 3-0, not really through the fault of Bailey Ober. I was very much blaming Ryan Jeffers, but then he begins to make amends. In the bottom of the second, he hits an RBI double to bring in Miranda, who had a big game. Brooks Lee had a sacrifice fly later, so it's 3-2. And then there's a little bit of hope here kind of building, but I'm always kind of like, I'm watching the radar to see, like, are they going to get this lead before the game has to be potentially called early?
Yeah, and they do. Thank goodness. Thanks to Max Kepler, bottom third. He has an opposite field single with the bases loaded, and then Margot has an RBI single. We should note about Kepler's single. That's a little bit bigger deal, and it's important to reference that it's opposite field, because that means that he was intentionally trying to hit it to the opposite field, because Max Kepler's natural swing is a pull hitter, and so for him to do that, you could see his eyes, the way that he put the bat out to the ball. This is exactly what he was trying to do.
Clever girl.
Sometimes I think guys get too much credit for opposite field hits because it just happened to be such a late swing that it hit off the end of the bat. No, very intentional at bat by Kepler.
This is the kind of at bat we've been waiting for Max Kepler to be willing to do that, because that's what he needs to do, and they're going to give him so much space on the other side. And then it's in the bottom of the fourth where the book is basically closed on Kenta Maeda, the former Twin. Twins have a 2-out rally with a Correa walk, a Larnach walk, Miranda doubles, and then Jeffers hits a 2-run home run.
Bottom 6, Twins score 2 more on a Jeffers grounder to Joey Wentz, who fields it well, but then he throws to Keith, who's covering first, but the throw is nowhere near Keith at first base. And so 2-run score. And what's so funny about this is Provis made a comment about Jeffers being sure not to turn towards second base at all. And so Jeffers basically, he looked where the stands are and just sort of sidestepped his way back to first base to not give the umpire any margin for error to call him out.
Yeah, we're going to talk a lot more about that in a later segment. Bailey Ober goes 6 innings, 7 hits, no walks, just the 1 earned run, 8 strikeouts. Again, he looks really good. His ERA is down to 4.12 on the season. Maeda is not so good. He can't even get through the 3 innings. 9 hits, 9 earned runs, 3 walks, 3 strikeouts. His ERA is 6.71. When you're a guy like him who's going to throw, 90 miles an hour basically, kind of to top out, if you're not getting movement on pitches, if you're not able to trick anybody, he just looks kind of like defeated out there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people at the beginning of the season were like, oh, how is the Twins rotation going to make up for losing Maeda and Sonny Gray? And it's like, well, really, for losing Sonny Gray. Like I think we all kind of knew that Maeda is more of a wild card than a sure thing by any stretch.
And just some big games individually for the Twins. Miranda goes 5 for 5 with 4 runs, 3 RBI, 3 doubles in the game. Jeffers 3 for 4 with 4 RBI and 2 runs. Max Kepler, a couple of hits and a couple RBI. Really everybody except for the DH spot, ironically. And Castro at the top of the lineup gets a hit. And so, yeah, the Twins get a 12-3 win, and they win this series against the Tigers. Drops the Tigers to 39-47. The Twins are 48-38, back to 10 games over 500.
You'll notice I had to include the Tigers in the stats here, Dan, because we played them.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. A couple other quick things. The Twins have now homered in 22 straight games. That's a team record. And they have scored 10-plus runs in 11 games this year. That is an AL best, according to Aaron Gleeman. I think the only team in the majors with more is the Dodgers.
Well, that's not a bad team to be chasing, Dan.
Not at all. This offense is cooking. Well, hey, let's go on here to a segment that I think is very controversial now. Puckett's Picks winner.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks winner.
What's the controversy?
The controversy is that I finally get to pick Royce Lewis, and then he comes up lame, and I think he's going to have a big breakout series, and he probably was gonna, but then his adductor, or abductor, or whatever you say is the official word for groin, because we don't want to say that word too much. I'm just frustrated that I lost again, and I'm nowhere near winning this segment.
I don't believe that man's ever been to medical school.
All right, fair enough. We will probably use that sounder later, because I have thoughts on the look of Royce Lewis's face.
Yeah, so anyway, Hogs comes away with the victory with Miranda. I took Correa, who had 8. Dan had Lewis, as he mentioned, who had 3 and then didn't play in games 2 and 3. And the listeners took Buxton, who I think most of us thought was a sure thing, but he only comes away with 5. So why don't you go ahead and give the season standings that are now so controversial, Dan?
Well, you still have the lead on the season with 14.5 points. Hogs is, though, catching up. He's at 11.5, which with our half-point bonus system, he's only really 2 series away from catching you. I have 5 points, and the listeners have 3.5.
Oof, it's a rough go. They could turn it around, though. Lots of baseball left, Dan.
That's true. All right, let's move on here to our next segment.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
This one's pretty easy. I mean, Jose Miranda had 7 hits, 1 walk, just 1 strikeout.
I am not throwing away my shot.
I mean, his batting average is over 300 now. His OPS is 858. We're running out of ways to praise the play of this guy. He could just flat out hit.
I don't know what his ceiling is, and I think his floor is pretty high. He just seems like a guy who's very confident at the plate. I do not understand why pitchers think that throwing high out of the zone to this guy is a good idea, because he loves swinging with his shoulders. It's just a bad idea. He sees the ball so well for whatever reason when it's higher up for Miranda, the way he makes contact. And I just love it. It feels like every time he makes contact, it's going to be a double to the left field wall. His swing just always seems to look that way.
But if you look at this Twins lineup right now, you've got Castro, Correa, Larnach, Miranda, Jeffers, Kepler's creeping up on 700 OPS. I mean, these are guys who are like well over 700 OPS, and that's not even counting Buxton. That's not counting Royce Lewis. Brooks Lee is technically, batting 1,000 OPS. Like, there are just a lot of bats right now who are hitting really well for this team.
It's a fun time to be a Twins fan, certainly. It's also a nerve-wracking time knowing that the trade deadline is looming, and really what you need is frontline starting pitching and probably a middle reliever. And I just don't know that this front office is going to be willing to make the move, even if they don't need to make a move for any position players.
Well, we'll see. Who do you have as your beast?
Well, this is tricky, Dan, because Miranda is the obvious choice, and I don't know that there was a very obvious second choice, so I sort of went with the unsung heroes of the series. So I went with Brooks Lee making his major league debut. He goes 3 for 6 with an RBI. Margot goes 3 for 7 with the big homer in game 1. And then Christian Vasquez, he was big in game 2. And let me talk about my bench so I can further explain that. So first of all, he had a home run, but behind the plate with David Festa, who I've put on my bench.
Are you combining your beast and bench into like one conflict? What are you talking about?
I'm combining my beast in my bench because my beast tried the beast, or one of the beasts that I put on my bench. Oh, hang on. I'm getting a little...
Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
I sort of knew where this was going. What I'm trying to say is one of the reasons why Vasquez is a beast is because of his attempts to make David Festa not be on the bench. And so behind the plate the entire game, because the biggest problem with Festa, you even mentioned that like one of the homers he gave up was high out of the zone. It doesn't matter at that point that it was high out of the zone, because everything he threw was high and out of the zone, and the Tigers were taking that to heart. And so Vasquez is more or less every pitch screaming from behind the plate for David Festa to get the ball down, because every pitch was high and the Tigers were mashing. So I have to give a ton of credit to Vasquez, because he's doing everything in his power to make David Festa realize that you need to stop throwing the ball here. Every pitch, Dan, Vasquez is slamming his glove to the ground, pointing down with his finger. I'm guessing he's yelling it. It's just amazing to me that Festa couldn't figure out, like, I wonder why Vasquez keeps pointing at the ground so much.
Okay, but hold on. He knows what he's supposed to do. This is the same argument we've had over the pitch down the middle. Festa knows that he's supposed to put the ball down in the zone, but he can't seem to do it. Like, this is a failure of execution here by David Festa, not a failure of strategy or a technique.
Well, clearly it is. Okay, just so I
right. Well, maybe technique a little bit, but not strategy.
Vasquez should say nothing then. Vasquez should say nothing in this moment where all that Festa is doing is...
No, he shouldn't say nothing. I'm just saying that he shouldn't be throwing his helmet down or yelling. Again, this is your daughter with the milk, David, right? This is her spilling the milk outside of the kitchen.
Kiss the cows.
No, this is the whole thing. This is about being teammates, Dan. This is Vasquez trying his best to encourage David Festa to throw the ball properly, not high. And I don't quite understand. Again, I think your argument is absolutely ridiculous.
Just saying that
like,
David Festa
Vasquez
knows what he's supposed to do,
here.
right? He just can't do it. Like, that's
the
the
problem. So your argument is Vasquez should say nothing.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that obviously Vasquez is doing that, and at some point, it's not like David Festa's not trying to throw the ball low. He's just not throwing it low.
Honestly, I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
I feel like you're blaming David Festa for not doing what Christian Vasquez said. Like, and it's like, well, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
By definition, he didn't do what Christian Vasquez told him to do, and it led to
Christian Vasquez telling
runs.
him to do that is going to make him do it. Like, it's just he wasn't able to hit the zone.
So coaches shouldn't exist either. I don't understand this line of argumentation, Dan.
Right.
You're like, how dare you tell someone what to do when they know what they should do?
I'm moving.
Okay.
I'm going to go with my bench here. It's an easier choice. I'm going to go with Austin Martin. 0 for 4. I think there's going to be some pressure on him with Lee up in the majors because I think that if Brooks Lee makes a strong case that he should stay and Royce Lewis returns, I think it's possible that maybe it's Austin Martin who gets sent back down, given that he's got some options and he hasn't established himself yet as an MLB player.
No, the only issue is Lee's not going to play the outfield.
No, I know.
At all.
But you can move Willie Castro back out there in a pinch, and if Buxton is indeed playing healthily in center field, 5 games a week, then I think you can probably manage Castro out there once and just kind of cross your fingers when a ball is hit to him.
Castro hasn't been too bad when he's been in center outside of that series against the Yankees.
Yeah, but that was pretty costly, the mistakes that he was making.
Okay, to imagine that the Twins were going to win any of those games to begin with is a little bit far-fetched.
Well, okay, this is getting farther field, but I would say make sure that Rocco times those where they're at target field, or at least it's somewhere Castro feels comfortable playing center.
Okay. Well, with that here, let's go on to Rocco's Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
Well, so here's the thing, Dan. Rocco, you found your order. Don't change it. Alcala, Jax, Duran, every single time. Anytime that the game is close or the Twins are in a winning position, Alcala, Jax, Duran. And then also, just a great time to have Caleb Thielbar pitch in Game 2. That's when I want to see Caleb Thielbar. I want there to be no chance that the opposing team's going to come back and win, or no chance that the Twins are going to come back and win. That's when Caleb Thielbar belongs on this mound. So bravo, Rocco.
So basically, when you would use a position player, use Caleb Thielbar.
Exactly. It's a great time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do wonder about Caleb Thielbar and whether he really... I mean, you can only have so many guys on the roster who are just your mop-up men. And I think, is he the only mop-up man right now?
I'd say half the bullpen is mop-up men right now, Dan.
So I'm going to praise Rocco again, and you're not going to like this. He gave up Game 2 in the sense that they were only going to be competitive in that game if David Festa was pitching well. And Rocco wasn't going to do a lot otherwise to try to win that game. He was trying to win this series, and I think ultimately the homestand. Because if you look at the way that the pitching matchups line up here, Festa was kind of put out there to say, hey, if you can beat the Tigers, great, but we have our best pitchers arguably going in this Houston series. We just want to win the homestand. And he was not going to use the guys you talked about. He's not going to use Alcala, Jackson, Duran in the situation. So it kind of worked out. For all the reasons you said there, it worked out that the Tigers won that game handily. Because if that's a close game, I don't think that positions the Twins well to win in Game 3 and potentially win that Astros series.
Well, Game 3, you didn't even need any relievers, Dan. They didn't play the whole thing.
I know, but he can't predict the weather. Like, Rocco didn't know they were only going to play 7 innings.
Okay, I don't know. I don't want to talk about
Rocco has limitations,
right?
Rocco can make great decisions in so many ways, but the man is not Nostradamus of the skies, right? He doesn't know. He's not Paul.
Pay no attention
who's
to the
guy
man behind the dugout.
It was Paul Douglas, right? He is no Paul Douglas, the noted meteorologist from Minnesota.
Paul Douglas?
Paul Douglas he's been doing meteorology for like 50 years in the Twin Cities. You don't
Paul Douglas for who?
Well, he was on KARE 11 for a long time, and then he made his own path. All right, let me give you
Belinda
Sven
Jensen?
Suncard or something like this. Give me another Belinda Jensen.
Dave Dahl been's there
you
forever.
Go. He's
Channel
not any
4.
of those people, right? He's just a manager.
Okay, he worked at KARE from 1983 to 1994.
Yes,
Dan.
the seminal days of my youth. That was when I was a small child.
Okay, well, moving on, Dan. Let's keep going here, Minnesota Mo.
Minnesota moment.
Game 1, bottom 7th. I'm calling this Buxton's inning here. So he hits a double. He advances on a wild pitch. And then Jeffers hits into a fielder's choice. That's how it shows up on the scorecard. But that's not what really happened. This allowed the Twins to take a 4-3 lead. So there's a high bouncer over the mound. It's fielded by the second baseman, Keith. And he throws home, but it's not in time to get Buxton. And so then the throw gets away from the catcher, Rogers. So Jeffers gets into like a set motion to run to second. But he's already run through first base. So he's a good 15 feet past first base, and he's like starting his jaunt back to first base, but he's just being real slow about the timing to come back. When he sees that the ball gets away from Rogers, he tenses as if he's to run to second base. He doesn't turn towards second base. He doesn't actually move at all going to second base. Like if you had a GPS tracker on Jeffers, it would not show that he moved towards second base at all. But because he tensed as if he would potentially choose to run to second, the Detroit Tigers get him out as a force play at first because supposedly the umpire said you were showing that you were going to go to second base. Now, I see you have a rules note. I've been real excited about this since I saw you updated the spreadsheet. Do you want to tell us what the rule is, Dan?
Yeah, well, first, and it was umpire Alex McKay who ruled him out at first base. And it was almost like he was watching and waiting for it to happen. So here's Rule 8.2.7. A batter runner who reaches first base safely and then overruns or overslides may immediately return without liability of being put out, provided he does not attempt or feint an advance to second. And I think that that's where Ryan Jeffers got himself in trouble. There was a little bit of a shoulder bob, like a duh, like he was gonna like maybe kind of inch over. Like your point about GPS is true if the GPS tracker was in his feet or maybe his waist, but if it was in his shoulders, there'd be a noticeable kind of just a slight move towards second base. And I think that that's what got him in trouble.
I don't know. Like I just think that if Jeffers or Conger thought that that's what was happening, obviously they would have made more of an effort to get him back to first.
I think
so.
Well, I think the issue was that Ryan Jeffers seemed to think that if he didn't cross the line, if he didn't cross the baseline towards second base, he was okay. Like he could have done a dance in foul territory, but if he never crossed that line, he's safe. I think that's probably what happened here, is that Jeffers didn't actually understand the rule, and he didn't know that if he even kind of feinted towards second, he would be called out if he didn't get back to the base in time. That's what I think happened.
See, I think that, and I agree from a letter of the law perspective, I think that what bothers me about this one is the fact that there was no movement towards second. I would say not even his shoulders moved towards second. It was more straight up and down, but he did tense. Like, you knew the only reason you're tensing in that situation is to run to second base. There's no denying that. But there was no movement towards second base at all. And so I guess that's the question.
I think it's by the letter of the law, though. It's a feint, and so I think that that's why Alex McKay's got that rule book memorized much better than Ryan Jeffers does.
Okay, well, what do you have here for your Minnesota moment?
Well, mine is going to be Royce Lewis's injury and his comments about it and Brooks Lee's debut and all of this kind of getting tied up together because we have put obviously so much hope in Royce Lewis.
He is the one.
And then this groin injury. And so I wanted to read you some of his comments post-game because I do think this is interesting. He said about his groin injury, "It feels great. But again, I've always felt great shortly after injuries. Today it felt very loose, like I can go play DH. But you've got to be available for the field. So obviously we've got to be smart about what the next steps are. But it's definitely not as severe at all as anything I've had in the past." And then he also talked a little bit about after that. He said, "What I was told, it's a lot of compensation for the lack of strength I have in my quad because of that injury still," Lewis said. "Not that if we rush that back. It's just that it takes 8 months of time. And if someone is ready, clearly I was able to perform at a high level, so we didn't want to wait. You have to be 100%. I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think first off, it's clearly related in that sense that he was compensating. I think that that's fair to say. I'm thinking this maybe could be a really good time for him to sit. He wasn't playing particularly well. And if he can get a good 3 weeks here with only missing, 12 games, it's not the end of the world here. And we get to see Brooks Lee and see what the Twins have in him because they didn't want to send anybody else down. And it doesn't seem to be a long-term injury for Royce. I don't think that this is a terrible situation that the Twins are in, given the circumstances.
It's just funny because we've had this question a bunch of times throughout the season, and I've posed it a number of times, which is, out of our big three, Correa, Buxton, and Lewis, which two would you choose if you could only have two? And I feel like that answer has shifted pretty drastically as the season has progressed at different times. And right now, the two guys who are swinging a hot bat and playing well in the field are Byron Buxton and Carlos Correa. Outside of the comments from more of a logical and a health standpoint that you've mentioned, I just think from a competition standpoint, if you could only choose two of three at this exact moment, and I know I'll get added, I understand that, I'm still taking Carlos Correa and Byron Buxton.
I think I am at this point as well, because also you've got a guy, Jose Miranda, playing a mean third base right now and swinging a bat that's 800 something OPS, and you get a chance to see Brooks Lee. And maybe what we're looking at down the road here is an infield of Lewis, Correa, Lee, and maybe Miranda even playing some first. There's just a lot of flexibility where you've got those four guys there. I'm looking forward to the rest of this season and then also into next season. I think this lineup is going to be super good next year.
Here's to hoping, Dan. With that here, let's go on to Mauer's musings.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's Musings.
So does David Festa get another start here? And he could have as many as 2 potentially between now and the All-Star break. I know the Twins have talked about maybe wanting Puckett back. Should he get another start? Has he done enough? Has he done too much here to show that maybe he doesn't deserve him? What do you think?
I think that out of the options available, I don't know that Festa is that terrible of a choice. Mm-hmm. Like, he's young. He's still figuring it out. He didn't have all that many starts at AAA before making the jaunt up to the majors. I think that you give him another chance, even though he struggled mightily. I just think that if your options are Festa or Varland, you sort of know what you have in Louis Varland, and you don't quite know what you have in David Festa. And I don't think going to Puckett right now is a good idea. Shut him down for a bit, let him see if he can come back. And honestly, even if he filled a role out of the bullpen like he did in the postseason when he came back from injury, I think that that's a better approach for Chris Puckett at this point, because when he struggles greatly.
And he was struggling as greatly as David Festa was at this point. So I agree with you. Give Festa a chance to make some consecutive starts, make some adjustments. And if you send him down after the All-Star break, now he's got that body of work to think about and kind of better prepare himself while he's at St. Paul to come back to the Twins, because I think they're hoping he's going to be a starter for this team next season.
Yes. So Dan, I love Drive to Survive. It's what got me into Formula One. I love Full Swing, which is basically the PGA version of that. And I love Sunderland Till I Die, which is about the Sunderland Football Club and their attempts to return to the Premier League from relegation. I've wanted to watch for a very long time a show called Welcome to Wrexham, which is the story of Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds buying this Wrexham Football Club, which is a team that plays actually below the English pyramid of football. Like, it's below organized English football. It's what they call this National League. And it's very difficult to get a team out of that league. And this one has been there for like 15 years. I've wanted to watch this for a long time. It was on Hulu. I didn't have the subscription. Well, Hulu and Disney, somebody bought somebody. You know how those things change every other day? Anyway, that became available. And I have been absolutely hooked. I absolutely love it. It's so interesting to watch teams sort of change and shift, and just the dynamic of relegation, Dan, and promotion is just so insane. And one of the things that I love about the show is that they go through these it's like this FA Cup thing where basically anybody who has an organized soccer team can join this tournament, the Premier Leagues, and then even local cop squads that play on Sundays or whatever, they put their team in. And that idea, Dan, of a single A team going up against the Yankees to win it all is just nuts in a big old tournament. But this show, Dan, what these shows do so well, Dan, especially the football ones here, they're so focused on the community and how important the clubs are to the people who live in these towns. And this club at one point almost was lost because there just wasn't funding. All of the fans, Dan, put together money drives and had charitable events to try and get money to save the football club, which they did. And I love that when you're talking to somebody about what team that they cheer for, if you meet someone, Dan, and they say they're a ball guy, you probably say oh, well, who's your team? Or, sure. Who do you cheer for? You don't normally say, who do you support? Right? That's not that's not in our vernacular. But so over there, cheering for a team is not just cheering for a team. It's being willing to go out of pocket to keep a team in your community. So my question is, Dan, the Twins are struggling with funding because the Pohlads have finally gone bankrupt. Even though they saved all that money, they still managed to lose it in some other way. Would you contribute to a fund to keep the Twins in Minnesota or go canvas to get donations to keep the team here?
First of all, you sound like somebody who actually really likes soccer. I don't understand why you're this guy who doesn't like soccer, right? Because all of the things that you talked about there are the reasons that people love soccer. Yes, I would.
I like a lot of the things around football. Thank you. I've been learning, Dan.
It's called football.
But the sport itself, I still find just not as interesting as the other sports that I follow.
Fair enough. But yes, I would go around asking for some. I would never want the Twins to leave. We almost saw this happen, 20 years ago or something like that, where there were threats that the Twins would leave. The thought of not having a Minnesota team, I cannot possibly transfer my fandom. I've lived out in the Northwest now for a good section of my life. I just can't. There's a part of me that will always be a Twins fan that can't adopt the Mariners as my primary team. Try as hard as I might, I can't root for the Mariners. Now, it might be that they haven't won as many playoff games even as the Twins, I think, over the last 20 years. That's probably part of it. But no, the Twins are deep in my heart. I don't have a tattoo or anything, David, but if I were, I think that would be a pretty good candidate.
Certainly. Well, with that in here, let's go on to series grade.
Series grades.
I'm going to give him an A- here, mainly because there's just not a lot you can do in Game 2, Dan. When your starter gets absolutely wrecked, like, you still played pretty good baseball. Like I said, a lot of highlights from this series, actually. I just think it'd be nice to see him score some more runs on less infield hits. It just felt like the last couple of series, all the runs the Twins scored were, like, between the shortstop and second baseman just sitting on the infield grass. And it's like, can we get a couple of deep balls here to score a couple of these runs?
It's Lady Luck. David, he blew on their dice. This time it worked.
We're not doing this again. No, move on. What's your grade?
All right.
Keep going.
So my advanced retreat score is 8 out of 10, 2 out of 3 against the sub 500 team. I think that feels about right. Well played baseball, 9 out of 10. Aside from Festa's performance, this team played pretty well. They pitched well. The bullpen did. They didn't even have to pitch the last couple innings, so that was a bonus. So that's a 17 out of 20 for a B.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
There weren't a lot of fans left, David, to be entertained at the end of Game 3 there, from what I was told.
Well, yeah, they scored 12 runs, and the Twins were like, was that not enough?
Yeah,
like, are you not entertained? Go home now.
That is a great sounder. I love a good Gladiator. We love Gladiator. We don't talk enough about Gladiator on this podcast. I guess it's because it's a baseball podcast.
Yeah, it's in my, but yeah, let's keep going here. Herbie's headlines.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
It's a sad day, David. Eddie Rosario has been released by the Washington Nationals. He played in 67 games this year, a batting average of 183, an OPS of 555, which is a lot worse than pretty much anything else that he had done. Do you think the Twins could sign him?
Maybe. I mean, did they let Joey Gallo go also, or is he still on the squad?
No, hanging on to him. I actually think the Twins do not need Eddie Rosario. The last thing they need is more left-handed outfielders and people who overrun bases and make mistakes. Clearly, the Twins have enough guys to do that.
I suppose. Next point here, Ohtani. Some would say the greatest baseball player on the face of the planet currently. Some would disagree with that sentiment. He was saved from a foul ball by a ball boy's quick reaction. And it's impressive, first of all, the reaction speed of the ball boy, and secondly, how hard that ball would have hit Ohtani if the ball boy hadn't caught it.
Pretty remarkable. You know, the people around Ohtani who are protecting him from harm is getting to be a pretty long list now here, David.
Rob Manfred, ball boys, his interpreter who took the fall for him. Yeah, lots of people around Ohtani taking care of business.
For the record, we don't think that we really don't think that Ohtani was to blame and all the gambling things from his interpreter. But
okay, well, first of all, that's not an official podcast statement. Let's start there.
Right, fair enough.
You can speak for yourself. That's your own Twitter handle right there, Dan. That's
where's your tinfoil hat there, David? You're putting that on your head.
No, okay, my goodness. I think the odds that Ohtani placed no bets is more tinfoil than the idea that he did.
All right. We don't have time for that now. One last thing. This was just kind of funny. A friend sent this along to me. There was a fan at the Padres-Rangers game sitting behind the Padres dugout, and to catch a foul ball, this man walked onto the dugout like TC Bear would, and holding his beer. I don't know that he actually caught the baseball. He tried. He fell into the netting over and kind of like trampolined back and then on top of the dugout. My favorite part is he went back to his seat and he assumed that the security guards coming over were there to shake his hand, and he like put his hand out and then they're like, no, dude, you need to leave the baseball game.
Yeah, the trampolining part is definitely the most fun. Like, I'm surprised he didn't do the knees and then back up to his feet standing. Would have been.
Oh my gosh, it could have been better, right? He could have. His landing could have been a whole lot better.
Yes, certainly. Well, with that here, let's go on to Puckett's picks for the upcoming Astros series.
And we'll see you tomorrow night. Puckett's picks.
Well, the listeners, unsurprisingly, are going to take Miranda, and then it falls to you, Dan.
I'm taking Carlos Correa. He's playing his old team. He's playing at home. He's playing really well, but there are lots of good choices right now.
Yeah, I'm going to take Brooks Lee, actually. So I think that Buxton would be a good choice, but I just think that Brooks Lee, I think, was likely a bit timid with the bat. He was just trying to make contact, which he did. So I think he's going to be a little bit more loose, and I think he's going to get his first home run in this series, Dan.
Let's hope that we're going to be there, or at least I'll be there for all the games. I think you're going to be there with me, with Hogs for the first one. He is picking Buxton, and so we will have plenty to cheer for, not just for the Twins, but for our own Puckett's picks live and in person at Game 1 tomorrow.
Looking forward to it, Dan. Well, I'll go ahead and send us out. Well, folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on X at Men for the Win and find our Men for the Win Facebook and Instagram pages. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Link in the description. Thanks for listening, and as always, Go Twins! That'll wrap up another episode of Men for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, Go Twins!